Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macri, with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. I am joined because it is Monday for you. Even though we're recording this on Super Bowl Sunday, we don't know who won the Super Bowl yet. I'm joined by my co-host, Jeremy Cohen. Jeremy, do you have any, was it ducats? Ducats is the old term from, what's the play? The Shakespeare play with the ducats. Oh, come on. I know you're a Shakespeare. You're not a Shakespeare scholar?
Not really. Theater, yeah. Shakespeare, not as much.
There's a play that there's ducats.
This is a great start, by the way. I don't remember ducats.
Well, do you know what ducats are?
No, I was going to say, in non-old English terms, can you enlighten me? Because I have no
money. Do you have any money on the game?
I don't know. I should have thought of that. No, I don't currently have any. No.
That's a shame. I don't have any either.
We'll see. We'll see if all right. Well, that's a shame too.
Yeah, I think I have. My mom bought a box, and she's like, "If I win the box, I'll give you half the money." I'm like, I don't need your pittance. Even though the Knicks are perhaps leaving me desiring some sympathy. Well, I shouldn't say that. The Knicks aren't leaving me desiring of sympathy. It's just the aura around the team right now is leaving me a little wanting. Because it seems like, I'll tell you this, we'll talk about the Miami game that they just finished up a little while ago before we get into the Derrick Rose trade. By the way, for anyone listening to this who doesn't know, the Knicks have traded for Derrick Rose, Dennis Smith Jr. and the pick they got from Charlotte this year from the Willie Hernan-Gomez trade.
I was going to say, if you had just stopped at a Derrick Rose trade, you probably should have said something like, "Oh, and if you're hearing this, it's not 2016, you did not fall into a coma, or this isn't Groundhog Day."
They made that trade in late. I want to say I'm going to hear, this is going to test me. I want to say the day of that trade was May 24th. I'm going to look it up.
I think it was a June trade.
I don't know why May 24th. It should be. It probably is a June trade. I don't know why I thought May 24th. I'm going to look it up. We'll see who's closer. But I'll say that I think this is a good place to start, and we'll talk about the game real quick. If you would have said to me before the season that the Knicks would be 11-14 after 25 games, and they would be in, there's a game in progress right now. Actually, no, all the games that are affect them in the standings are over today. So, and they are sitting in 8th place. So they are a playoff team as of right now. The 8th best team in the Eastern Conference. If you would have told me those two things and the accompanying stuff about like Randall's playing like an all-star, RJ Barrett's played well, Emmanuel quickly has emerged, Toppin has moments, and you would have told me that, I would say more than half of Knicks Nation would be, what's the word? Displeased with how things are going. I'm not sure I would have believed you. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I'm not really sure where to go from there, but I will turn it over to you while I look up the date of that trade.
It was June 22nd. I was doing that while because I had an internship, and that's why I had seen it. It resonated. Anyways,
kudos to you.
Thank you. I think that in terms of everything going on, I think it's very possible that a lot of us, myself included, underrated this team because of the stink that is David Fizdale. Because in reality, if you can go 17-27 with Mike Miller, then you should be able, with a better roster and, some obviously the coaching and development, and then these guys just naturally progressing on their own, all of that should equate to a better team than 17-27. What that win pace is, I believe it was like a 32 win pace.
We're about
82 game season.
Actually, no, it might have been. I'll look that up right now while you're continuing.
It might have been 31. Could have been like 31.4. Anyways, it's this sort of thing where I don't have a problem with what we saw today in terms of this trade. I think that we as Knicks fans are so conditioned to feel pain and to be outraged and angry that our first instinct is, oh my God, just pure rejection. Like that was mine. When I saw that the Knicks were possibly going to trade for Derrick Rose, I was like, okay, well, maybe this is part of a third team where the Knicks can take on a salary. And then it got closer. And I thought, well, maybe this is something where they're at least not buying, because the idea of them buying would be absolutely ridiculous. And then you find out what the haul is for Detroit, if you can even call it that. It's basically a little less in matching salary.
Not sure you can call it that.
And it's a second round pick. And again, like I don't mean to put down second round picks, but here's the reality of it. Second round picks are incredibly risky because you could of course you get a Mitchell Robinson with your second round pick. But if you think Mitchell Robinson is the norm in any sense of the word, then you are just fooling yourself. Second round picks are ridiculous lottery tickets. And if you're looking at something that's like in the early to mid 40s, it's not going to yield you something that's so like stand outish that you can't replace that. Like Dotson, for example. I know that a lot of people love Dotson, but the one thing we found out is that Dot is replaceable. And that's essentially what that later second round pick is. It's usually a replaceable thing. Like the Detroit pick, that is going to be right at the cusp at the end of the first round. That is a good pick. You don't trade that pick unless you're moving up because you have to consolidate in some way, most likely. And the Knicks were never going to have 4, picks from this draft. It just was never going to happen. So with this idea of Derrick Rose, again, this wouldn't have been a trade I wanted, but it comes down to really, I guess you could say 4, but you could consolidate into 3 things. Number 1 was the cost of business, right? And the cost was pretty good. Again, like you took essentially dead salary of Dennis Smith Jr. and you took on $2 million extra in money. Okay. And you traded a second round pick that's going to be like, in the early to mid 40s. Fine.
And rarely do teams make 4 picks and keep all those. Like at some point they were going to have to move one of those picks, and they moved the worst of them. So
right. And the advantage to having that 4th pick is really, if you're not going to consolidate, it's to draft a player who's maybe international, and then that way you can have their draft rights and use that to send out in a trade. But you can still, again, like look at what the Knicks did in 2015 with Louis Laborie. They had they bought the 57th pick from the Pacers, and they can use his rights to trade for, anything. Just, you have to send something back. So that was the first thing. The second thing, of course, comes down to what is Derrick Rose's role going to be?
Yeah.
Because
which I think is the most important thing.
Absolutely. At least right now that we've gotten past that first part, that is 100% the most important thing, because Derrick Rose is not a starter. That has not been his role. Since leaving the Knicks, he has come off the bench in 75% of his games. And you'd like to think that continues based on his usage level, which is high. And the fact that when you have Randall and you have Barrett, you've got mouths to feed. You don't need someone at the point who's completely off ball. Like, you want someone who can cut, you want someone who can handle it, but you don't want someone who's just, going to be like Peyton, where they're in so many ways a black hole offensively, and their assist percentage is down to a ridiculous degree because he's just not performing well. And the third thing comes down to, again, I guess you could shift over to Peyton. How much time is he going to get? Is he going to be on this team long term? Can you trade him for someone? Can you get him to waive his no trade protection? Because the thing with Peyton as well is he is salary filler. And I know that when some people hear that, they think, well, the Knicks have $15 million in salary. Why do they need to use him as salary filler? For the same reason that they just used Dennis Smith Jr. in a trade. They used him as salary filler. They used him to be able to make the money work. They could have done it separately, of course. But if you take in Dennis Smith Jr., if you take in Derrick Rose, then you're down to what? About maybe $10 million in cap space. You're losing money that you could have used. And that's a problem, which is why using a player like Elfrid Payton, like Dennis Smith Jr., in that case, it gets you closer to making the deals you want. And the fourth thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back to you, Emmanuel Quickley. Again, you have to figure out what his role is going to be. I think that you have to give him significant minutes just because of the fact that he deserves it. But because if you're trying to figure out what this whole thing is long-term, you want to see him getting minutes around your best players. And that's vital. It can open up so many different avenues, because if you have Derrick Rose solidifying your bench and actually, giving you solid minutes, and you also figure out a way to, as I believe Woj has tweeted out, get Austin Rivers off of the team, that opens up a ton of new avenues. So yeah, I know I've said a lot, but
no, that was a great precursor. I wanted to throw in there in terms of the Austin Rivers, just to update all of the news that's currently out there. That Berman kind of snuck it in his article that Rose is the one who's Rivers is going to be the one likely to be out of the rotation. And then Woj in his ESPN piece noted that what the hell was his wording? Rivers is likely to be a player that could be of interest to teams around the trade deadline. That's, help make my client look good. That's what that is. And
but there's something to be said about Rivers in that his contract is great. And I'm not just talking about the non-guaranteed portions.
it is. It's a good contract.
But the other really fun clause about it is that it's not guaranteed after the moratorium. So all of these teams can essentially have his money on the books and use that salary to make a trade and then non-guarantee it at a certain point.
Yeah.
And that's really important for teams that are going to be like severely capped out or in the luxury territory. So I can see that being beneficial to other organizations.
Just reading Bobby Marks' tweet. Interesting to see where Derrick Rose falls on the pecking order of guards and who loses minutes as a result. Rose graded out to a second-round pick when it comes to a return value, and I do not think the New York Knicks overpaid to get him. Could be a rare win-win for both teams. I think this is going to be most of the consensus around the league. I think most of the league is going to look at this trade as like, all right, the Knicks had the worst point guard situation in the league, and they got someone who is not an answer to their point guard problems, but is someone who will help. And I think I said it on the live stream I did after the game that, to me, I have not watched a ton of Detroit basketball this year. I don't know if you have, Jeremy. I've watched, I've watched a handful of games, a quarter and a half there, quarter and a half here. I haven't watched a ton of Rose. Obviously, I just know in terms of his numbers, it's essentially he is passing more in relation to his overall usage than he ever has in his career before. So he's looking to get others involved, it would seem. And he's struggling immensely around the rim. He's shooting better from three than he ever has before, but I'm not sure if it's on significant enough volume to make a difference. However, I think he does pose more of a threat than Elfrid Payton. Not that talk about the world's lowest bar. So as a kid who wore fat kid jeans, they were called Husky brand jeans. That's what my mom was like, they're not for fat kids, they're for husky kids. I could say this, it's like being the thinnest kid at fat camp. Anyway, he'll help. I think he'll help. And I think if you need proof of the fact that he'll help, just look at the other four teams that are rumored to have been in on him. It's Brooklyn, it's Miami, it's the Clippers, and it's the Lakers. You may not trust the Knicks front office as far as you could throw them, but those four front offices seem to have some modicum of a clue as to what they're doing. Brooklyn maybe less so because they're in a little bit of a desperation situation, but the other three for sure. I want to speak to one other thing that you mentioned earlier before I'm going to save that to the end. The thing about their wins last year, just on Rose. Yeah. Like, this is a big, okay, let's give it a shot. What do we have to lose? I don't see where the hand wringing is coming from, assuming Emmanuel Quickley is still as significant a part of the rotation as he has been. And I think one underrated point of that is we've gotten to see Emmanuel Quickley finish a fair portion of games here over the first month and a half of the season. And as Tibbs always says, it's not who starts, it's who finishes. And I think Emmanuel Quickley has gotten a lot of those opportunities because Elfrid Payton has been so bad. And it's like, okay, let's give the kid a shot. And he's come through. I wonder now with Derrick Rose here, will Quickley get as many of those opportunities? And I hope he does, because not all minutes are created equal. Tibbs talks about this all the time. Late in the games, it's like a different skill set is required. The ref's whistle changes, and it's like all these types of things. And I think you look at Quickley, and there's some good and there's some bad. He came into the game against Miami, and we should say it was a well-played game. They missed some shots down the stretch. I don't know what there is to say about this game. It was a good game. It was a competitive game. We could talk about the RJ Barrett not being on the court at the end if you want to touch on that. But Quickley comes in the game and immediately breaks down the defense and throws an alley-oop to Mitchell Robinson. And if it was, I want to say maybe that might have been the last meaningful basketball of the game for the Knicks. Maybe Randall had one after that. That was it. But then there were other times where they were just kind of passing the ball around the perimeter, and Miami was trapping and doing what they do on defense, and Quickley couldn't really do anything with that. And so I think you're looking at, okay, this is a point guard learning on the fly. So then what do you do with that, right? Do you let him struggle, and then do you let the team struggle as a result? But that gets us back to the whole, how is Tibbs getting more out of these guys than so many coaches have gotten out of the Knicks so many years in the past? And I think it's they believe that they have a head coach and a franchise that is doing everything they can to win every game, which is where the development questions get a little dicey because, do you want to give that up? I don't. So that's really where this trade comes down to for me. I want to see how it looks on the court. I want to see who gets minutes. I want to see when they get minutes. If it's Rivers that's out of the rotation, fine. What happens to Payton? You assuming Rose starts or Rose comes off the bench, it wouldn't shock you. Would it shock you if Rose starts and Payton comes off the bench?
Little. I just don't think that that's who he is at this point in his career, and I think Tibbs is cognizant of that.
For 29 other teams, I'm just wondering if
no, I get it.
Team, maybe it's different.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Didn't he come off the bench behind Teague in Minnesota? He
has been a bench player since Cleveland, and I want to say that was where the transition happened. But he didn't. Right. He played like 200 minutes in Cleveland.
Right. Yes, and it's also going to be fascinating here because you'd cited Rose's numbers this season, and you're right. I mean, around the rim, it hasn't been great, but he's also played half. Right, he's played half the minutes that Elfrid Payton has.
Yeah,
so there's just not a whole. It's not a huge sample size. That's the one thing in terms of Rose. I think a lot of it. I was talking about this, how we're conditioned to kind of feel fear as Knicks fans.
Oh, I want to get back to that too.
Yeah. I think that obviously that a lot of that comes with Emmanuel quickly, but I think a lot of it also comes from Knicks fans who just deep down, they don't feel the team's ready to take that next step forward. And they recognize that Rose coming in could push the Knicks up where it's like, okay, so basically what you're telling me is if they win the play-in games and they happen to make the playoffs, they just get swept. And, again, whether that's like subconscious or not, we have to recognize that the Knicks are trying to work here. You can look at, yes, we could have a tanking conversation, until day turns into night and night turns into day.
But isn't that what this Derrick Rose trade ultimately comes down? Isn't it a conversation about whether you believe in tanking or not?
To an extent. You have a larger margin of error because of the Mavericks pick, which is great. It's lovely to be in that position. And you hope that the Mavs keep losing, because then if you keep winning, that's fine too. But I'm sure that there's the idea of like, well, deep down, if you also lose and if the Mavs lose, you're looking at 2 higher picks, and that's great too. But then, you get into the whole thing of like, well, Emmanuel Quickly was just drafted 25th overall. So, again, I don't want to get into that debate. It was more just a thought that came to my mind, because I think as well with Derrick Rose, it's like, well, we've seen this movie before, and I honestly don't know if that's true. Listen, the Knicks and Derrick Rose are 2 very different points in their lives. The Knicks are obviously not a sentient being.
You're talking about it like it's a relationship.
Right. Well, it kind of is,
Can you believe Johnny and Marie got together again? They didn't learn their lesson the first time. Oh my God. He still has the scars, literally.
Yep. But yeah,
they're different people.
They are. They're different people. Listen, the Knicks under Tibbs are very different than Rose running the triangle under Hornacek under Phil Jackson. It's just a different point in time. And I don't think that we can look at that experience and say it's going to be exactly like that. It's going to be a disaster. And for the people who are, sounding the alarms, I'm not even saying you're wrong, because it's very possible that this could just be Tibbs going all in. But it also feels to me like every step of the way for the last, I don't know, since maybe Tibbs was hired back in late July, I think, it seems like there's always been this fear of, well, the Knicks are going to go for it, and they're going to push all their chips into the middle, and they're going to go for it. And then they don't. And then it comes up again somehow, and then they don't do it again. And then it comes up like today.
And again, no chips have been pushed in.
Right. Again, there are periphery ancillary moves you can make as long as you don't sell the meat and potatoes for magic beans. You're going to be fine. That's okay. And that's the beauty of using the leftover cap space you have. You can buy and you can sell. You can take on, like if you trade Austin Rivers for a draft pick, that's great. If you take on salary, that's cool too. There are things that you can do here that you have the flexibility to do. And that is why, again, like we can view this Derrick Rose trade as itself. But we also have to look at the bigger picture, and it's why I don't believe we can truly judge this trade until the end of the trade deadline when we see what the team for the rest of the year looks like, because otherwise it's like looking at one piece of the puzzle and saying, well, that's what the puzzle looks like. It doesn't. It's just a piece. That's it.
And I want to see what the rotation looks like. I want to see what it looks like. Not only the first game that Derrick Rose is here. I want to see it over the course of the first 20 games that Derrick Rose is here. Want to see what happens at the trade deadline. I want to see what they do in the offseason. As you mentioned before we came on, Ian Begley reports that it's reasonable to expect the Knicks to look to re-sign Derrick Rose in the offseason. Otherwise, why would they trade for him now? I'm certainly not going to question Ian. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into this. I see very little downside risk. And I think to what you said, the kind of Knicks fan PTSD, and like I've been harsh on, overly harsh on some Knicks fans over the last couple of weeks, just because I have a personal, I don't know, I respect authority too much. And like, to me, when a guy is producing, I know it's
classic
a shame.
Bootlicker Macri.
When a guy is producing, you're limited in how much you should be allowed to question that. And to your point before about the pace that Mike Miller had them on, it was indeed 31 wins and change. Can I just go through? So only eight of those 17 wins came against teams that went to the bubble. And keep in mind, 22 teams, 21 or 22 teams went to the NBA bubble. 22 teams. So that means 9 of the 17 wins came against the 8 worst teams in the league. And I also want to say it wasn't just that they were the 8 worst teams in the league. They were playing those games against teams who were already mailing it in. And like wins at the beginning of the season, to me, when you're still in it and when everybody's still in it and everybody's still going for it, which everybody is right now, with the exception of maybe Detroit, maybe Minnesota, and maybe Washington. And guess what? The Knicks haven't played any of those teams yet. So I think you can make an argument that every single one of their wins has been a quality win this year. Not sure you could say the same thing about last season. And then the teams that went to the bubble, they had wins against Washington, a decimated Washington team. They had, I think it was 2 wins against the Nets when the Nets were not healthy. Or maybe 1 win against the Nets when the Nets were not healthy. Here's the thing. We watched those games. We watched that team. Mike Miller made Fizdale look terrible, and he was a lot better than David Fizdale. I don't think that precludes us from saying the effort that Tibbs has them playing with consistently night in and night out, and more importantly, the scheme that he has them playing with, specifically on defense, is just for me, it's a different level than it was last year. And that's just me. Maybe I'm in the minority. Maybe I'm seeing what I want to see and not what's actually there. But to me, I think Tibbs is owed. I don't know. I think he's owed a little bit more credit than he's getting. And I know that's not going to be a popular opinion, especially after he leaves RJ Barrett on the bench for most of the fourth quarter. But, that's kind of where I'm at.
See, I see it a little differently in the sense that, and RJ just didn't have it today.
He had a bad game.
It was a back-to-back. He wasn't playing well. I get why he wasn't playing.
He's 20 years old. It happens.
It's a shame, obviously, that it was against the Heat and Tyler Herro, because I know that a lot of fans wanted that matchup. But the reason I see it differently is this. I think that it's not, if we don't outright say, oh man, Tibbs is doing a fantastic job, it seems like it's not appreciated. It is. It absolutely is. But this idea that we can't ask questions, or that we shouldn't ask questions after wins, is a little crazy to me, because of the fact that that Tibbs is going back there and he's going to take a look at the film and he's going to ask himself similar questions, or much more advanced questions. And you're not going to see the players being like, well, coach, we won. So why are we doing this?
He's never happy. Right. He says it himself. He's never happy.
He does. In the same way that, you could pay compliments to someone, but then if you say one thing that's constructive criticism, it's deemed like you focus on that one thing. Or, just the fact of how you can look at a team and you can analyze it and appreciate that they're excelling in these categories, but say, well, maybe we should talk about something that they're not doing as well in, so that they can do better at it later. And then it's like, well, if we can't talk about that after wins, then what are we doing here? Because if it's when we try to bring it up for losses, it's like, well, we just lost. Okay. Let's not hammer that point home too hard. And when it's a win, it's like, well, we just won. So why are we talking about the negatives? So again, that's just how I see it in terms of
that's the correct way to see it.
Right. Well, I certainly think so.
No, I think that's the correct way to see it. I guess I'm surprised that it almost, maybe this is just me misreading the room, but it almost seems like there are already people who are A, out on Tibbs, and B, if they're not out on Tibbs, they're like, Tibbs doesn't know how to manage a rotation. And I think there's a gray area between Tibbs has made some choices that it can and should absolutely be questioned in terms of the regular rotation and in terms of minutes distribution and substitutions in game. I think there's a big gray area between that and this guy, he has them playing hard, but he clearly doesn't know what he's doing when it comes to the things that matter the most. That, which I feel like is where a lot of fans are at. And that's the point that I'm like, I can't get there. I don't know how people can. It's
a broad spectrum, right? I mean, this idea of what he's able to do, what he's not able to do, you're going to have people arguing constantly no matter what happens, but it's more the idea of, just enjoy the win. Like, well, you can enjoy a win and also have questions about where you can improve at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive things, but no, again, they're just things to work on. We talk about, not necessarily you and I, but the narrative is out there that we as New Yorkers were never satisfied. And so if that's the case, then we just have to accept that and say, great, you're right. Let's see how we can improve. Let's constantly continue improving, because the ultimate goal is obviously a championship. And until we see that team get there, we're going to have things to talk about, and we're going to want to try to, get everything perfect or as close to perfect as it can be so that we can say we won, we did this, we're at the top of the mountain. We're not there yet.
And then nobody ever gets to ask you a question. And I think actually we really just kind of, it took us half an hour. We really just stumbled upon why this Rose trade has become kind of a third rail thing for a lot of people, is because it goes hand in hand with a lot of the questions because people were already on this kind of wave of like, it's just, okay, I love the wins, but like the certain things about this are just not okay. And then to now inject a guy who we know he's going to play 20 minutes a night, if not more, like that, you could write that down in pen, like that's going to happen. And, you to believe that is in furtherance of larger organizational goals. And this gets back to the very first thing that you said, requires trust. And that's one thing I cannot blame any fan for not having, is complete and utter trust in the coach, the coaching staff, the front office. Not after the last 20 years. You don't get a year's worth of, well, they didn't screw anything up. And then all of a sudden, and what is their record? 11-14. And then all of a sudden everybody should trust you. That is not the case. So I get that. And I hear that, and I acknowledge that. And I respect it. But I do want to see how this plays out before I call this out as like, it's the Knicks being the Knicks.
Right. And I think one more thing just to touch upon here is, we know that Tibbs likes his 10-man rotations for the most part.
Yeah.
And so I look at next year's team, because when you see that the idea in mind is re-signing Derrick Rose, number one, if Derrick Rose is in the right environment and he's got the injury history he has, and he is as old as he is, I think he's going to be 32 this year. If he's comfortable,
I think he's 32 now, actually.
Right. Like, you're not going to make that much more money than where he's at right now. What teams are really going to offer him more than like $6-7 million? That's essentially Alec Burks money, especially when you account for a slight bit of inflation, because I think the cap is going to rise by about at least 3%. So let's just look at it on paper, what it is right now, right? You got Randall, you got RJ Barrett, you've got Emmanuel Quickley, you've got Mitchell Robinson, and supposedly next year you've got Derrick Rose. That's 5. Then you've got Obi Toppin, you've got 2 first-round picks, 1 late. Well, I said late first round because that's the way I think about it. 1 early second round pick. Already, that's 9 roster spots that you've got filled for what you'd hope would be your rotation. I haven't
if they keep and use both of those picks on players that will be in the rotation next year. That's a huge if.
Right. But even if, let's take away 1, right? So what? We're like 8.
I think one is fair. I think it's fair to say one. Let's go with 1.
Okay, so then we're at 7. Yeah. That means that you've got what probably. I mean, if they move Kevin Knox, then the amount's going to only grow. But you're probably
which they could have done here and they didn't.
Right, but it tells me like number 1, they're probably pretty out on Kevin Knox, the point where they're willing to trade him for an expiring contract. But also 2, they weren't willing to make it in this deal. So there's some prudence that's there. But even if you take Knox out of the equation and just trade him for expiring salary, you've got 7 roster spots that we've just filled. You've got 3 guys, and you've got like $45 million to spend on 3 players. And then that's not including the room exception that you have, which is for probably like $4.9 million
next year. So
that's a lot of money to spend on only 2 to 3 roster spots, which is great because it means that you can go, you can spend a lot of money on a player that is desirable to you. Obviously, this is not a very strong team, or excuse me. Well, yes, but also it's not a strong free agency is what I meant to say. Freudian slip, I guess. So if that's the case, you can target someone like I'm sure that we'll talk about this more, right? I can't see Mike Conley leaving the Jazz, but I also know that if they stay in the luxury tax this year, they're definitely going to be in the luxury tax next year. They get hit with a repeater tax. If you wanted to pay a little bit more to pry him away, you have the money and then some to do it. And because the Jazz would be looking at like, well, we don't really want to pay $60 million for Mike Conley. Yeah. That's the sort of thinking. It doesn't have to be him, but that mindset of like, you can just consolidate your money behind like him or an Oladipo, or if you really wanted to do a complete long shot, it's not going to happen. I'm just telling you right now, it's not.
Oh God.
If you wanted to say Kawhi Leonard, again, not saying it's happening. I'm not. It's not going to happen. He's staying with the Clippers. There's no reason for him to leave.
We should not be allowed to bring up his name on this
probably
podcast.
Not, but I just did. So
we shouldn't.
No, you're right. But again, it's that mindset of like players you could target with that money and still have something left over to help you support those guys. That's really it.
No, it's all well said. But we have a long way to go before we get there. And I think here's what I'm personally happy about. We're 25 games in, more than a third of the way through the season. And the focus is still on this season. And I think more than anything, that's why they made this trade today. I think they want to continue to keep the focus on this season. And I think, they knew they needed help, and they did need help. But if all you have to do is watch the games, they knew they needed help. And I like that mindset. I like the mindset of we're not going to allow this to devolve into a season where we have somewhere between 15 and 30 games that are utterly meaningless. And the notion that they want to have, however many it winds up being, meaningful games. And I think that's ultimately, where for fans, you're either on one side of that split or the other. You either think that there is inherent value in playing meaningful games into May, or you think that it's basically a big, what. And it's just worth it to just, no, I would much rather see Obi Toppin playing 25 minutes a game. I don't care what happens as a result of it. I just want to see the kid play, which if that's your stance, there are teams that have gone about it that way. I don't see those teams as having usually figuring it out. And that's the thing I always go back to is when people were like, it's great if you're winning, but if you're not playing the kids, what does it matter? I still want somebody to point me to the franchise at any point that has played kids before they're ready to be played. I'm not talking about again, that's what it comes down to, right? If you have a kid like Emmanuel Quickly and he can help you win games, then yes, you're going to play in 20, 25 minutes a game. But like kids that are clearly not ready and you throw them out there for all these minutes, like show me the example where that has yielded positive results, either for the player himself or for the franchise as a whole. I mean, and this is the last thing I'll say, and then we could finish up. We'll do a very quick progress report before we get out of here. Bam Adebayo. How'd Bam Adebayo look today? I'd say he looked pretty good, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would.
Decent player, right? Bam Adebayo didn't make the all-rookie team his rookie year. And that's not because Bam Adebayo was a bad player his rookie year. He was on his way to becoming the player he is now. He didn't average 20 minutes a game. His second year, He averaged 23.3 minutes a game. First year, he averaged under 7 points a game. His second year, he averaged under 9 points a game. It took that dude who I know you've read the same Zach Lowe story that I did. Like on day one, he was the hardest worker in the franchise. It took that dude 2 full seasons before he was earning starters minutes. Like, that's the Heat. The Spurs, look at what they did. Like, they have all these kids popping off this year. Keldon Johnson, Lonnie Walker. Like, those dudes didn't play last year. The Raptors, go look at how much Pascal Siakam played as a rookie. Go look at how much Chris Boucher has played over the last few years. And then, like, look what he's doing. Like, these are your pinnacle franchises in terms of drafting and developing. And I know it's easy to be like, well, of course they did that because they had better players in front of well, first of all, not really. And second of all, I'm not sure it matters. Like, they're guys are ready when they're ready. And if you give, and we've seen what happens when you give guys minutes before they're ready. And we saw it with Kevin Knox 2 years ago. And how's Kevin Knox doing right now? So that's really it that I want to say.
Quickly's no stranger to that, by the way, at Kentucky. No. He did the same thing happened with Calipari.
Yeah.
He barely played in his first year. At least he didn't play nearly as much. Second year, mostly spending time on the bench, explodes in the games that he has to start and that he does start, and then becomes the SEC player of the year. It happens. It's not, it isn't a science necessarily for each player. Every player is going to be different. But I think to kind of bring it home, if the thought process behind a lot of this also comes with draft compensation, I was asking in the Strickland Draft Slack channel about, like, I had read both on Twitter and on Reddit, this idea that, like, you've got your 1 through 5 in terms of that's your tier. I mean, yes, Cade's probably in a tier of his own, but really 1 through 5 is great. And then 6 through like 20 is kind of murky. So if that's the case, if you're looking at a very wide range where, like, a guy who's taken at 7 might not be better than the guy who's taken at 19th overall, if you try to do better as a team and you can still get that right talent, where is the harm in that? And if you wanted to trade up for your guy because you've got the 31st pick as well, most likely, maybe 33rd at worst or so, you can use that too. You don't necessarily want to, but you can use it at your disposal. And I look at the standings right now, and the Knicks are in 8th place, as you said. And I see that Indiana is in 5th place, and they're only a game and a half away. And the Knicks should have a fairly easy schedule. And here's the thought process.
They're going to have winnable games, yeah.
Right. Is there a huge difference between 15 and 18 from a draft perspective? Doesn't sound like it.
No.
Is there a difference between 15 and 18 in terms of a playoff experience? Absolutely. You're talking about having to win a road game as like an 8th seed to play in. If you win that, then you get to be the 7th seed. If you lose that, then you have to play the winner of the 9-10 and you get to host that. But if you lose that, you tumble more. Or you can just avoid all of that, in its entirety and finish 5th, finish 6th. And if you can do that as a team led by Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Mitchell Robinson, and if Derrick Rose is the type of player that helped you get there, then I don't see how we can be upset by that, because that's a statement. That's a great statement.
People will find a way to be upset.
I'm sure, of course.
And when people will be upset when they trade for the guy who has the Knicks on their list, right? That's when people won't be upset. Or when they sign the guy outright, because then there will be proof of concept. Until then, there is no proof of concept. This is a bunch of guys fumbling around in the dark looking for answers. That's what it is. Yeah. All right. I've been promising this progress report thing. I don't know what much progress report we have to update on other than that Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett continue to be very good. I will say this. Let me say this real quick. Obi Toppin had a moment today. He had a couple moments. I just want to put that out there. I want it to be recorded. I want it to be on the record. He had some moments today. I watched Halliburton most of his game the other night. He's going to win Rookie of the Year. He's really good. But I am not yet losing faith in Obi Toppin. I just want to keep seeing the moments, little moments, a couple moments each game. Is that enough for you, Jeremy? Or are you still in on Obi?
Yeah. Again, like I didn't necessarily want him as a draft pick. He's here. I am fully accepting of the fact that he's here. I agree with the sentiment that if the Knicks knew about that this would be the Randall that they have, they probably would have looked in a different direction. Like I'm speculating here very much so, but I look at Devin Vassell and that just screams a Walt Perrin pick.
I think they would have taken Halliburton.
I don't know about that.
I think they would have taken.
I mean, it's possible, but there was also that rumor that Halliburton really wanted to go to Sacramento and kind of tanked his value on purpose. So if that is true, then that, that doesn't stop the Knicks from taking him, but you just never know. Vassell plays off ball. It doesn't matter. It's all fruitless anyway.
It's all water under the bridge.
Right. But no, I mean, it was nice to see the explosion from Obi. It was so funny when that three ball, when it was they were contesting whether or not it should have counted. And he's just going like this for a solid. That's a meme. I got to get that.
Yeah. That was good.
No, again, like it's baby steps. I think that there is, based on his age, I look at it where I've said, like, I expect him to be among the best rookies. And I stand by that. At the same time, I also get the idea of, well, if he's a late bloomer, then maybe he'll just bloom later at the NBA level too. Maybe if he's a year or two behind in terms of his development, then it's going to take a year or two for him to get to where we want him to be. Because again, like, this is a dude who was balling over the summer a couple of years ago with like Carmelo and other players out there, and he was holding his own. So it's just, the game's moving quickly. He's learning. I hope he gets there. I think it'll happen, not this year, but just as long as he sees minutes on the court and can grow from it and leans on a guy like Kenny Payne, it's encouraging. There's no other way to put it.
The game is moving more quickly for him than it is for Quickly. You see what I did there?
Yeah, no, I did.
You did see that?
I did, yes.
I have to close out this Bam point. Obi Toppin has now been healthy and available for 15 NBA games. Over the first 19 NBA games that Bam Adebayo was healthy and available for. Bam Adebayo, 20-year-old rookie, so not quite 22, but not 19 either. How many minutes do you think he averaged per game?
17.
He averaged 12.3 minutes per game. He averaged 3.5 points and 3.5 rebounds. And he had 9 DMPs for a Miami team that was essentially a 500 team. Like, they weren't anything special.
Sounds like a bust to me.
Yeah. And again, this is Bam fucking Adebayo. So I think everybody, we went so long without basketball. And I think I'm not giving enough credence to the fact that, fans, me included, wanted what they wanted. I want what I want to. You want what you want, Jeremy, and you should get what you want. And when things are, not going that way, it is really easy, and it is very tempting to be like, my God, the answer is so obvious. It's right in front of us. Let's just do it this way. And a new regime, new coach, a lot of young players. I think let's give it a little time. Let's see what happens. I'm curious as everybody else to see how this goes, but I remain hopeful and confident. I believe I won our 4-game. Did I win our 4-game prediction?
Yeah.
Because you guessed 1 and 3, right?
Yeah. Wait, they played 4 games. So yes, I did.
Well,
right. Because you got 2 and 2. That's what I'd wanted, but you had the rightful claim. So you were victorious.
Yeah. Because they won 2 games. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that means I get to go again. And then next week we're doing the next 10 games, right? I think we're due for that next game.
We just did the next 10 games. So we've got 4.
So the next episode next week. Yes. Okay.
No, the week of the 20th is when, because we just did 10 last week, but next week when we record this, I think we're going to have to do the next 10 games at that point, because we're not going to record another episode before they play their 30th game. Whatever. We'll figure this out later. For right now, we're just doing the 4. They're having 3 this week, and then they'll do 3 the next week.
Oh, then maybe you're right. Okay, right. So maybe we do have 2 weeks. I'm so used to their games being on top of one another. That's the other thing. The Knicks have played. This was their fourth back-to-back game. I was writing something else for another thing yesterday. There are teams out there who have played like one back-to-back. Knicks, this is their fourth one. A hard schedule. Okay,
yep. And still 11-14.
Yeah, this week, Tuesday at Miami, Friday at Washington, Saturday home Houston. Only 3 games. I'm going to get 2 nights to watch something that whatever I want. This is glorious. I'm sure I'll be watching basketball. At Miami, at Washington, Houston at home. Put my money where my mouth is. I come on here. I say, the fans who aren't bought in, they're idiots. I can't come on here and then say they're going to go 1-2. What kind of a man would that make me? It would make me a very small man, which I am 5'6". 2-1. 2 wins, 1 loss.
Well, once again, you have taken my record. I so regret that I gave you the ability to pick first, but alas.
You didn't give it to me. I earned it. I won.
You did. Yes. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I lost, and by virtue, you won. I would say, again, like I don't want to say 2-1. I do want to say 2-1, but I can't. I don't want to say 1-2, but the margin of error for 3-0 is pretty.
Hold on. They could go 3-0.
Of course, they could, but it just takes 1 loss, and then the ball's in your court, buddy. I can't allow that to happen. So we're going to go 1-2 again. I'm going to be Mr. Pessimism because I need my title back.
I hope you're wrong. I hope you lose again.
Sure. I guess I do too, since you keep getting to be the optimistic type. So
yeah, I guess so. Man. Okay. Well, we've had some real fun today. I hope you at home have had fun too. And thank you for listening. Jeremy, anything else from you?
I think the absolute worst part of this trade is now we have to refer to Leon Rose as like Leon and Derrick Rose as D Rose. There was 1 Rose. We had 1 Rose. We kept it simple, and now we've got 2. And that just sucks. It just sucks. It's gonna get really confusing, and then I have to think like, oh, what do they mean by Rose? Do they mean the player? Oh no, they mean the front office. I hate it. I hate everything about it. Fuck this trade.
This reminds me of there was a follow-up to Chinatown called The Two Jakes. You familiar with this movie?
I'm not familiar with the movie.
Oh, okay.
But forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
And on that note, thank you for listening to another. We're just 2 ridiculous idiots who come on fun. Here. This is just why do we have a podcast? We're 2 idiots. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. Thank you for Jeremy for keeping us honest, and thank you to me for nothing. And mostly thank you to you for listening at home. Don't forget, by the way, we have people that work very hard on this show. When I say people, I mean our producer, Andrew Claudio, and would really appreciate a 5-star review if you are so inclined, or a 5-star rating. That's it. A 5-star rating and a positive review. That would be great. And subscribe to the Knicks Film School YouTube channel. Go check out the Strickland. Jeremy had a kick-ass Victor Oladipo piece on there to end the week. I would strongly recommend reading that. And what?
You're too humble to admit that you also had a great Victor Oladipo piece. Which is funny because I'm glad we wrote it when we did, because now it's probably moot. Because I don't think they're traded for Victor Oladipo with Derrick Rose.
Don't be so sure.
Oh, okay.
All right. We'll see you next week. Adios.